Jake sat at his desk, staring blankly at the holographic screen in front of him. It had been a long, monotonous day of data entry at the sprawling galactic commerce hub where he worked. As he reached out to shut down his workstation, a notification popped up indicating an incoming transmission on his personal frequency. Curious, he tapped the flashing icon. The face of a solemn-looking man in a crisp suit filled the screen. "Mr. Jake Emerson?" the man inquired. "Yes, that's me," Jake replied, puzzled. "How can I help you?" "I am Nathaniel Brixton, the executor of the estate of the late Mr. Thomas Novak. I regret to inform you that your friend has passed away." Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Tom, dead. He hadn't seen his old buddy in years, not since Tom had left Earth to seek his fortune among the stars. They'd kept in touch sporadically, but the vast distances of space had gradually pulled them apart. I don't know what to say," Jake stammered. "What happened?" "The details are still unclear," Mr. Brixton said, his expression unreadable. "But that's not why I contacted you. Mr. Novak left explicit instructions that, in the event of his demise, his most treasured possession was to be entrusted to you." Jake blinked in confusion. "His most treasured possession? What do you mean?" "His wife, Lara." If Jake had been drinking, he would have done a spit take. His wife, "What the hell, Tom?" he muttered under his breath. Louder, he said, "I'm sorry, but I think there must be some mistake. People can't just give other people their spouses." "Normally, you'd be correct," Mr. Brixton agreed. "However, Lyra is not human. She is a Zephyrian, and under the laws of her people, she is considered property to be inherited. Mr. Novak's will is ironclad." Jake's head was spinning. This had to be some kind of sick joke, but the executor's stern expression never wavered. "So, what happens now?" Jake asked weakly. "Lyra will be arriving on Earth in 3 standard days. You are to meet her at the New York spaceport at the time and date specified in the information packet I'm sending you now. Good day, Mr. Emerson." With that, the screen went blank, leaving Jake gaping at his own reflection. A chime indicated a new document had arrived in his inbox, but he ignored it. His mind was whirling with 1,000 questions. Tom was dead. That alone was hard to wrap his head around. But he had apparently left Jake his wife, his gorgeous alien wife that Jake had never even met. What was he supposed to do with her? She wasn't some piece of jewelry or furniture to be passed around. Suddenly, his tiny apartment seemed to be closing in on him. He needed air. He needed time to think, to process this insanity. He grabbed his jacket and practically bolted out the door, nearly bowling over his neighbor in his haste. The city streets were awash in the neon glow of 1,000 signs, advertising everything from the latest hovercar models to gene modification clinics. Jake hardly saw them as he walked, his feet carrying him aimlessly as his mind raced. Tom, his adventurous, larger-than-life friend, gone forever. And in his place, a living, breathing complication named Lyra. What had Tom been thinking? Jake knew his friend had always been impulsive, but this was beyond the pale. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. He didn't know the first thing about Zephyrian culture or customs. How was he supposed to relate to Lyra? What would he even say to her? He groaned, running a hand over his face. In 3 days, his life was going to change irrevocably, and he had absolutely no idea if he was ready for it. As he turned to head back to his apartment, a glint caught his eye. It was his reflection in a store window, looking pale and lost. For a moment, he could almost imagine Tom standing beside him, grinning that devil-may-care grin of his. "Well, buddy," he muttered to his absent friend, "you sure knew how to leave me with one hell of a going-away present. I sure hope you knew what you were doing." Squaring his shoulders, Jake headed home to read the information packet and prepare for the arrival that would turn his world upside down. The New York spaceport was a hive of activity, a cacophony of languages and species from 100 different worlds. Jake stood in the arrivals area, nervously scanning the crowd for a face he'd only seen in pictures. The information packet had included a single image of Lyra, and she was stunning. Porcelain skin, high cheekbones, eyes that seemed to shift color like a kaleidoscope. Jake felt his palms sweat at the thought of meeting her in person. Suddenly, there was a stir near the gate. Heads turned and conversations paused as a figure emerged from the throng of travelers. Jake's breath caught in his throat. It was her, Lyra. In the flesh, she was even more gorgeous than her picture had suggested. She moved with an otherworldly grace, her simple white dress flowing around her like mist. Jake swallowed hard, his mouth dry. As if sensing his gaze, Lyra turned, her eyes meeting his across the crowded space. A small, tentative smile curved her lips as she made her way towards him. "Mr. Emerson," her voice was soft, with a lilting accent that sent shivers down his spine. "Please, call me Jake." He held out his hand, then pulled it back, unsure of the protocol. It's nice to meet you." Her smile widened a fraction. "The pleasure is mine. Thomas spoke of you often." Jake's heart clenched at the mention of his late friend. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Lyra." He was one of a kind. Something flickered in her otherworldly eyes, sadness, or perhaps resignation. "Thank you. This must be very strange for you." That was the understatement of the century. "Yeah, you could say that," Jake agreed with a rueful chuckle. "I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, to be honest." "I understand." Lyra looked down, her long lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. "On Zephyr, what Thomas did is considered a great honor, but I know Earth customs are different. I don't wish to be a burden to you." No, you're not a burden," Jake rushed to assure her, though part of him wondered if he was telling the truth. It's a lot to take in, you know." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps we can learn from each other. I am eager to understand your world, and maybe I can share some of mine with you." Jake found himself smiling, charmed by her gentle demeanor and open curiosity. "I'd like that," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. He reached for her single piece of luggage, a sleek silver case that looked far too small to hold all her belongings. "Is this everything?" he asked. "I travel light," she replied with a mysterious smile. As they made their way out of the spaceport, Jake couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers that followed them. He could only imagine what people were thinking. A plain, ordinary human with a stunning alien beauty on his arm. It was like something out of a trashy romance novel. But as Lyra gazed around with wonder at the towering skyscrapers and buzzing hovers, her hand resting lightly on his arm, Jake found he didn't care what anyone else thought. At that moment, all that mattered was making sure Lyra felt welcomed and safe in this strange new world. "So," he said as they climbed into a hover taxi, "what would you like to see first?" Her kaleidoscope eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Everything," she breathed. Jake grinned, feeling a sudden rush of excitement. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected inheritance wasn't going to be the disaster he'd feared. Maybe, in honoring his friend's last wish, he'd find something he hadn't even known he was missing. As the hover taxi rose into the air, merging with the flow of traffic that crisscrossed the city like glowing arteries, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was eager to find out. Beside him, Lyra gazed out at the city, her smile as bright as the stars she'd crossed to get here. The first few days with Lyra were a whirlwind of new experiences for both of them. Jake took her to all the places he thought might impress her. The towering Empire State Building, the lush expanse of Central Park, the glittering lights of Times Square. Lyra drank it all in with wide-eyed wonder, her delicate hand never leaving Jake's arm. But as the initial excitement wore off, the realities of their situation began to set in. Lyra, for all her grace and beauty, was a fish out of water on Earth. It started with little things. The way she would bow deeply to everyone she met, From the doorman at Jake's apartment building to the barista at the corner coffee shop. The way she insisted on wearing her flowing white dresses, even in the dead of winter. The way she would sometimes lapse into her native tongue. The lilting language that sounded like wind chimes and waterfalls. Jake tried his best to smooth over the awkward moments, explaining to curious onlookers that Lyra was from out of town. But as the days turned into weeks, the cultural divide between them seemed to grow wider. One particularly memorable incident occurred at a high-end restaurant Jake had taken Lyra to, hoping to impress her. The waiter, a snooty type with a pencil mustache, had handed Lyra a menu and asked for her order. To Jake's horror, Lyra had pointed to a decorative flower arrangement in the center of the table and said, "This, please." The waiter had stared at her, aghast. "Madam, that is not on the menu. That is a centerpiece." Lyra had blinked, confused. "On Zephyr, we eat flowers at every meal. They are delicious and nutritious." Jake had quickly intervened, ordering for both of them and apologizing profusely to the waiter. But he could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck. Later, back at his apartment, Jake had tried to broach the subject gently. "Lyra, I know things are different on Zephyr, but here on Earth, we don't really eat flowers." Lyra had looked at him, her kaleidoscope eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Jake. I don't mean to cause you trouble. It's just, everything here is so strange to me. I feel like I'll never fit in." Jake's heart had melted at the sight of her distress. He'd taken her hand, marveling at how small and delicate it felt in his own. "Hey, it's okay. We'll figure it out together. And for what it's worth, I think you're doing great." Lyra had smiled at that, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "Thank you, Jake. You've been so kind and patient with me. On Zephyr, kindness is the highest virtue. It's one of the things Thomas always said he loved about you." Jake had swallowed hard, feeling a sudden rush of emotion at the mention of his late friend. "He was a good man," he'd said softly. "I miss him." Lyra had squeezed his hand, her touch warm and comforting. "As do I. But I am glad to have you, Jake. You make me feel safe." From that moment on, something shifted between them. Jake found himself looking forward to their daily adventures, to seeing the world through Lyra's eyes. Her constant questions and observations, which had once seemed so strange, now felt endearing, even enlightening. He started to learn more about her world, too, about the floating cities of Zephyr, tethered to the clouds by shimmering strands of energy, about the Zephyrian concept of soul bonding, a connection deeper than love that linked two beings for eternity, about the gentle, nurturing nature of her people, so different from the often harsh and competitive ways of Earth. And as he learned, he found himself changing too, becoming more patient, more open-minded, more appreciative of the beauty and wonder that existed beyond his own limited experience. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more cultural clashes and misunderstandings. But with Lyra by his side, he felt ready to face them. Because in her, he had found not just a responsibility, but a partner, a friend, and perhaps something more, something he'd never dared to hope for, but now couldn't imagine living without. As the weeks turned into months, Jake and Lyra fell into a comfortable routine. In the mornings, Jake would teach Lyra about Earth customs, everything from using a fork to crossing the street safely. In the evenings, Lyra would regale Jake with stories of Zephyr, painting vivid pictures of a world so beautiful and strange it took his breath away. Gradually, without either of them quite realizing it, their bond deepened. Jake found himself looking forward to their time together more than anything else in his day. Lyra's gentle presence soothed him, her unique perspective challenged him, and her unwavering faith in him made him feel like he could take on the world. For Lyra, Jake was a rock in the tumultuous sea of Earth life. His patience never wavered, even when she made mistakes or asked endless questions. He made her feel accepted, valued, even cherished. It was during one of their evening chats that everything changed. They were sitting on Jake's couch, sipping the fragrant Zephyrian tea that Lyra had brought with her. Jake was listening intently as Lyra described the Zephyrian bonding ceremony, a beautiful ritual where two souls would intertwine for eternity. "It sounds wonderful," Jake said softly, setting down his teacup. "To have that kind of connection with someone." Lyra looked at him, her kaleidoscope eyes shimmering in the soft light. "It is the greatest joy a Zephyrian can know," she said, "to find the one who completes you, who understands you in a way no one else can." Jake swallowed hard, suddenly very aware of how close they were sitting. "Have you ever?" Lyra shook her head. "No, I have never found my soulbond. At least," she paused, her gaze locked with his. "At least, not until now." Jake's heart leaped into his throat. "Lyra, But before he could finish, Lyra leaned in and kissed him. Her lips were soft and warm, and tasted faintly of the sweet nectar they'd been drinking. Jake's mind went blank, every thought evaporating like mist in the sun. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. Jake stared at Lyra, wonder and confusion warring in his chest. "Lyra, what does this mean?" Lyra smiled, her hand coming up to caress his cheek. "It means, Jake Emerson, that I love you. That I choose you, not because of some inheritance or obligation, but because my soul recognizes yours." Jake's heart felt like it might burst. He'd been fighting his feelings for Lyra for so long, telling himself it wasn't right, that he was betraying Tom's memory. But looking into her eyes, he knew that this was exactly what Tom would have wanted. For both of them to find happiness, to find love. "I love you too, Lyra," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "I think I have from the moment I first saw you." They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, basking in the glow of their newfound love. Jake knew there would be challenges ahead. He was still just a regular guy, and she was an alien princess. But he also knew that together, they could face anything. As if reading his thoughts, Lyra murmured, "On Zephyr, we have a saying. 2 stars, 1 sky." It means that no matter how different two beings may be, they still share the same universe, the same destiny. Jake smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. 2 stars, 1 sky. I like that. And as they sat there, lost in each other, Jake couldn't help but marvel at the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. An unexpected inheritance, a journey across the stars, a love that transcended worlds. In that moment, he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. 2 stars, 1 sky, forever intertwined. Jake and Lyra were lost in their newfound love, spending every moment they could wrapped in each other's arms. Jake had never known a happiness like this. It was as if Lyra had filled a void in his heart he hadn't even known existed. But their blissful bubble was about to be burst in the most unexpected way. It was a lazy Sunday morning, and they were cuddled on the couch, watching the sunlight dance through the windows. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock at the door. Jake frowned, not expecting any visitors. When he opened the door, his jaw dropped. There, standing in the hallway, was a ghost. "Tom," Jake croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man grinned, the same roguish grin that Jake remembered so well. "Hey, buddy. Long time no see." Jake felt like the world was spinning. This couldn't be real. Tom was dead. He had to be. But here he was, in the flesh, looking not a day older than when Jake had last seen him. But how?" Jake stammered. We thought you were dead." Tom's grin faded, replaced by a look of regret. "I know, and I'm sorry about that. It's a long story, but I had to fake my own death. I was in trouble, deep trouble, and it was the only way to protect the ones I love." From behind Jake came a soft gasp. Lyra stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Thomas, is it really you?" Tom's face softened as he looked at her. "Lyra, my love, I've missed you so much." Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The way Tom was looking at Lyra, the love and longing in his eyes. It was unmistakable. Lyra took a tentative step forward, then another. Before Jake could blink, she was in Tom's arms, sobbing into his chest. Tom held her close, murmuring soothing words into her hair. Jake could only watch, his heart shattering into a million pieces. He'd been a fool, he realized. A fool to think that Lyra could ever truly be his. She had always been Tom's, from the very beginning. As if sensing his thoughts, Lyra pulled back from Tom, her eyes finding Jake's. "Jake, She trailed off, looking torn and miserable. Jake forced a smile, though it felt like a knife twisting in his chest. "It's okay, Lyra. I understand. He's your husband, your soulbond. Of course you choose him." Tom looked between them, realization dawning on his face. "Wait, are you too?" Lyra nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Thomas. I thought you were gone. Jake and She couldn't finish, overcome with emotion. Tom was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Jake's surprise, he let out a low chuckle. "Well, I guess I can't blame you. Jake always was the better catch." Jake stared at him, stunned. "What?" Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Jake, I know this is a mess, and believe me, there's nothing I want more than to have Lyra back. But," he paused, as if steeling himself, "but I also want her to be happy. And if that's with you, then I won't stand in your way." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide. "Thomas, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Lyra. And because I love you, I want you to follow your heart, even if it leads you away from me." There was a long, heavy silence. Jake could hardly breathe, his heart pounding in his ears. This was it, the moment of truth. Lyra had to choose, once and for all. Lyra looked between them, her expression anguished. Jake braced himself for the inevitable, for the words that would shatter his world all over again. But when Lyra spoke, it was not what he expected. I choose both of you." Jake and Tom stared at her, dumbfounded. "What?" they said in unison. Lyra took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. On Zephyr, it is not uncommon for a bond to be shared between 3 or more individuals. It's called a constellation bond, a union of souls that shine together. She looked at Jake, her eyes shining with love. "Jake, you have shown me a love and acceptance I never thought possible. You've become a part of me, a star in my sky." Then she turned to Tom, reaching out to take his hand. "And Thomas, you're my first love, my guiding light. I could no more abandon you than I could cut out my own heart." She brought their hands together, clasping them between her own. "I know it's unconventional, even by Zephyrian standards. But I believe that our 3 souls are meant to be together, to love and support each other through whatever the universe may bring." Jake felt a rush of emotions, shock, confusion, but above all, an overwhelming sense of rightness. Looking into Lyra's eyes, then Tom's, he knew that this was meant to be. "2 stars, 1 sky," he murmured, remembering Lyra's words. Tom grinned, his eyes misty. "Make that 3 stars, buddy." And as they stood there, hands joined, hearts open, Jake knew that their journey was only just beginning. A journey of love, of discovery, of 3 souls shining bright in the vast expanse of the universe. In the days that followed, Jake, Lyra, and Tom settled into a new routine. It was strange at first, navigating the dynamics of their unconventional relationship, but as time passed, they found a rhythm, a balance that worked for them. Jake and Tom, once the closest of friends, had to relearn each other in this new context. There were moments of awkwardness, of jealousy, but there were also moments of laughter, of shared memories, and inside jokes. They found that their love for Lyra, rather than dividing them, gave them a new understanding and appreciation for each other. Lyra, for her part, blossomed under the love and attention of her 2 bondmates. She was the bridge between them, the glue that held their constellation together. With her gentle wisdom and unwavering compassion, She helped them navigate the challenges of their unusual situation. But not everyone was as accepting of their arrangement. It started with whispers, with sideways glances, and hushed conversations whenever they went out in public. People couldn't seem to wrap their heads around the idea of a human, an alien, and a man back from the dead all living together as partners. Then came the media attention. Someone had tipped off the press about their unique living situation, and suddenly their faces were plastered across every news site and holofeed. Alien love triangle. The headlines screamed, back from the dead and into a threesome. Jake and Tom did their best to shield Lara from the worst of it, but they could see the toll it was taking on her. She was used to the gentle, accepting ways of Zephyr, not the harsh judgment and scrutiny of Earth. Things came to a head one evening when they were out for dinner. They had just settled into their seats when a group of men approached their table, their faces twisted with disgust and anger. "You're an abomination," one of them spat, pointing a finger at Lyra. "An alien whore, corrupting our men." Jake and Tom were on their feet in an instant, their bodies tense with protective rage. "Watch your mouth," Tom growled, his fists clenched at his sides. The man sneered, unimpressed. "Or what? You'll sick your little green girlfriend on me. I bet she's great in the sack, probably does all kinds of freaky alien stuff." Jake saw red. Before he could think, his fist was connecting with the man's jaw, sending him stumbling backwards. The restaurant erupted into chaos, people screaming and rushing for the exits. The other men surged forward, ready for a fight, but they were no match for Jake and Tom's military training, honed by years in the stars. They fought side by side, a perfect team, their moves complementing each other like a dance. In the end, the men lay groaning on the floor, nursing bruises and wounded pride. Jake and Tom stood over them, breathing hard, their knuckles bruised and bloody. Lyra rushed to them, her face pale with worry. "Are you all right?" she asked, her hands fluttering over their injuries. Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We're fine, love. Just a few scratches." Tom wrapped his arms around both of them, his chin resting on Lyra's head. "We'll always protect you, Lyra, no matter what." Lyra looked up at them, her eyes shining with tears and love. "I know, and I'll always love you both, no matter what the world thinks of us." As they held each other, ignoring the stares and whispers of the onlookers, Jake felt a sense of peace wash over him. Yes, their love was unconventional. Yes, it would always be a struggle to make others understand. But in the end, all that mattered was that they had each other. 3 stars, 1 sky, a constellation of souls, bound together by a love that defied the laws of Earth and space alike. Come what may, they would face it together. As they walked out of the restaurant, heads held high, hands clasped tightly, Jake knew that this was only the beginning of their adventure, and he couldn't wait to see where it would take them next. In the weeks that followed the restaurant incident, Jake, Lyra, and Tom made a decision. They were tired of hiding, tired of letting the judgment of others dictate their lives. They were going to live their truth, openly and unapologetically. They started small, with little acts of public affection, holding hands on the street, sharing a kiss in the park. Each time, they braced themselves for the stares, the whispers, the confrontations. But to their surprise, most people hardly seemed to notice. And those who did, well, they soon learned that it wasn't wise to mess with the trio. Emboldened, they began to speak out, sharing their story with anyone who would listen. They gave interviews, attended rallies, even started a blog about their experiences. They became the face of a new movement, a symbol of love and acceptance in a world that sorely needed it. It wasn't always easy. There were still those who viewed them with hatred and disgust, who went out of their way to make their lives difficult. But for every enemy, they seemed to gain a dozen allies. People who were inspired by their courage, their commitment to each other. One day, as they were walking through the city, a young woman approached them. She was trembling, her eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to say thank you," she whispered. Seeing you three, so proud and in love, it gave me the courage to come out to my family, to be true to myself." Lyra pulled the woman into a hug, her own eyes misty. "Never be ashamed of who you are," she murmured. "Your love is a gift, a light in the darkness." As the woman walked away, Jake and Tom exchanged a glance, their hearts full. This, right here, was why they did what they did. To make a difference, to change lives. Their greatest challenge, however, came from an unexpected source. One day, a sleek black ship landed on the outskirts of the city. Out stepped a delegation of Zephyrians, led by none other than Lyra's father, the king. Jake and Tom had never met the king, but they had heard stories of his wisdom and compassion. Now, seeing the stern look on his face, they weren't so sure. "Lyra, my daughter," the king said, his voice heavy with concern. "What is the meaning of this arrangement you have with these humans?" Lyra stepped forward, her head held high. "Father, this is Jake and Tom, my bondmates, my partners in all things. I love them, and they love me." The king frowned, his eyes flicking between the three of them. "This is not our way, Lyra. A bond is sacred, between two souls only." Lyra shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "No, father. A bond is a choice, a commitment of the heart, and my heart has chosen them." For a long moment, the king was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he began to laugh. A deep, rich laugh that seemed to come from the depths of his being. "Oh, my daughter," he said, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "You always did have a way of challenging tradition. Very well. If this is your choice, then I will honor it." He turned to Jake and Tom, his expression serious once more. "But know this, humans. If you ever hurt my daughter, if you ever betray her trust, there is no corner of the universe where you can hide from my wrath." Jake and Tom nodded solemnly, their hands finding Lyra's. "We would sooner die than cause her pain," Tom said, his voice firm. The king nodded, satisfied. "Then welcome to the family, my sons." And with that, the last barrier to their happiness crumbled. They were free to love each other openly, without fear or shame. As they stood there, the three of them, surrounded by the people they loved, Jake felt a sense of profound peace. This, right here, was where he belonged, with Lyra, with Tom, with the family they had built together. 3 stars, 1 sky, a love that had crossed the universe to find its home. And now, at last, they were complete.